My name is Wade Hollies. I'm 31 years old, and the phone rang at 2 in the morning the way only bad news ever does, like it already knew I would answer. I had been asleep on the cot in the back of my shop, boots still on, because that was how I slept most nights since my father died. The shop smelled of grease and cold coffee, and the rubber of new well casing. A man can build a whole life inside a smell like that if he is afraid of the quiet anywhere else. I had buried my father about 18 months back. He went down in the cab of the rig out on a job north of town, while I was 40 miles away pulling a worn pump for a man who could have waited a week. A bad heart, the doctor said, nothing anybody could have done. I have heard that sentence more times than I can count, and not one of those times has it gone all the way in. I keep thinking I would have known. I keep thinking if I had been standing beside him instead of chasing somebody else's emergency, I would have caught it, the gray in his face, the way he leaned. So I work. That is the whole of it. I run the rig he left me. I drill wells and set pumps across Cherry County, and I live out of my truck and the cot in the back. And there is a wooden box of his old logbooks I have carried from the house to the shop and never once opened. The voice on the phone that night belonged to a woman, and it was steady in the way people get steady when they have already used up all the panic they are allowed. She said her name was Della Hartman, that she ran cattle out past the Ardle Road, and that her well had quit. Not slowed, quit. The pump was sucking air. She had 160 head, and a string of stock tanks going dry under a heat dome that had sat on the sandhills like a hand, pressing down for 9 straight days. By noon, she said, it would be over 100 degrees again, and cattle in that kind of heat with no water do not last. They go down fast, and they do not get back up. She had called everyone closer first. I was the last name on a short list, and the only one who picked up. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not drive out to that ranch because I am a good man. I drove out because the work was the only thing I knew how to hold on to, and a dying herd at 2 in the morning was a problem I could put my hands on. I did not know yet that this would be the worst night of my year, or the start of the only good thing left to me. I have turned it over 1,000 times since, and I think it was honestly both, and I think those two things are closer together than anybody wants to admit. The sandhills at night are a strange country. Grass dunes roll out past the headlights like the sea decided to lie down and grow hair. And there are no lights anywhere, no town glow, just the black and the stars laid so thick they look spilled. I drove with the windows down and the heat still hanging in the air at 2 in the morning, which is its own kind of wrong. And I followed her gate markers down a sand trail to a low ranch house with one yellow porch light burning. She was already standing in the yard when I pulled in, and she had a battery lantern in one hand, and a come-along and a length of pipe leaned against the fence behind her like she had been trying to fix it herself, and had only stopped because she ran out of ideas, not out of nerve. Della Hartman was about my age, maybe a year younger, sandy hair tied back, sleeves rolled, and she looked at my truck the way a person looks at the last bus. Not desperate, just done waiting. She did not cry, and she did not apologize for the hour. She walked me straight to the wellhead and told me everything she knew about the well in plain numbers, the depth, the age, the last time it had been worked, and I realized within about a minute that she knew her own place better than most men know their own hands. This was not a woman who needed rescuing. This was a woman who had run out of tools, and I happened to be a tool that drove itself. The well was an old one, shallow, the kind people put down decades ago when the water sat high and close, and a windmill could lift it without breaking a sweat. I dropped a sounding line and my stomach went with it. The static level was way down, far lower than any log would have called for, lower than that well had any business being. It had not failed because it broke. It had failed because the water had walked away from it. That is a thing you feel in your chest before you can say it out loud, because a shallow well going dry is not a repair. It is a sign. I told her the truth, which is the only thing I have ever been any good at giving people. I told her the pump was fine, and the casing was fine, and the problem was that the water table under her grass had dropped below her well, and that to save her herd that night, I would have to bring the rig out, deep in the well and chased the water down to wherever it had gone. She asked me what that cost. I told her. She did not flinch, but I saw her do the arithmetic in her eyes, the math of a person who keeps her own books and knows exactly how thin the line is. And then she lifted her chin and said, "Do it. We will figure the money." And then she said something I will carry to my own grave. She said very quietly, almost to herself, "Why would a stranger do this for me?" I did not have an answer that night. I have one now, and I will get to it. But at 2 in the morning, with a herd lowing thirsty in the dark, I just said, "Because your cattle can't wait for fare," and I went and got the rig. I will not bore you with the whole of the work, but I will tell you that drilling a well in the dark while a heat that should have broken at sundown sits on you instead is a particular kind of long. I ran the rig, and Della ran everything else. She hauled water by hand from the house cistern to the closest tank to buy the worst-off animals an hour. She held the light. She read the gauges back to me so I could keep my hands on the controls. She did not get in the way once, and she anticipated me twice, which almost no one does. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, with the drill string biting down past where her father-in-law's old well had ever reached, we hit the sand that holds the deeper water, and I set the new pump, and I primed it, and we both stood there at the wellhead not breathing while it caught. And then it caught. Clean cold water came up out of that pipe and hit the galvanized tank with a sound like applause, and the cattle smelled it before they saw it, and they came on at a run. And Della Hartman put both hands over her mouth and laughed, and then did not laugh, and I looked away to give her the privacy of it. The sun came up on a herd that drank and lived. That is the plain ledger of that first night. I want to tell it plain because everything after it got complicated, and I would not want you to forget where it started, which was a woman who would not quit, and a man who only knew how to work, standing at a pipe full of water at dawn. I did not drive home and forget about it. That is the part I did not expect. I told myself I went back the next morning to make sure the new pump had seated right, which was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that the ranch had gotten into me somehow in one night. The orderly fences, and the cattle, and the way Della moved through her own work without wasting emotion. And the quiet out there that for once did not feel like the quiet I was running from. She had coffee on when I pulled in. She did not act surprised to see me. She handed me a cup and we walked the line together, and she pointed out a windmill at the far tank that had been squealing for a month. And I had my tools in the truck, so I fixed it. That became the shape of the next few weeks. I would finish a paying job somewhere in the county and find that my truck had pointed itself out the Ardle Road again, and there was always something. A stock tank float valve hanging up so the tank ran over and wasted water nobody could afford to waste. A length of fence wire down. The old windmill's pull rod worn near to nothing. I fixed the things I knew how to fix, and Della fed me, and somewhere in there it stopped being a job. She would not let it be charity, which I respected, so she paid me in the currency she had. She is a welder, a good one, better than me. And one afternoon she looked at the cracked bracket on my rig that I had been nursing with baling wire for half a year, and she said, "Bring it in the shop." And she built me a new one out of plate steel that was stronger than the part the factory had put there. I still run that bracket. I will run it until the rig dies. The old windmill was the one that got under my skin the most, because it was the one thing on the place that did not strictly need fixing, and we fixed it anyway. Della said Tom had been meaning to climb it the season he died and had never gotten to it, and she said it the way you mention a thing you have decided not to feel about, flat and quick, and then she changed the subject. So one still evening I climbed it. She fed me wrenches up a rope one at a time as I called for them, and I set new leathers on the pump rod and oiled the gearbox, and when we threw the brake off, the wheels swung into the wind and lifted water without a sound. We stood in the dusk and listened to it not squeal, and Della said she had gotten so used to that noise she had stopped hearing it. I knew exactly what she meant. I had been living in a noise like that myself. There was a morning, too, that I think about more than the big ones. A calf had been born wrong in the night, and Della had gotten it turned and out alive by herself. And by the time I pulled in, she was sitting on an overturned bucket in the corral with the calf nosing at her boot. So tired she had gone past tired into something almost peaceful. I got the little camp stove I keep behind the seat and made coffee on the tailgate and brought her a cup. And we sat on the corral rail and watched the calf find its legs and said maybe 10 words the whole time. Later that week, she made me sit at the table and eat a proper supper off a real plate instead of out of a foil wrap in the truck. We talked while we worked, the way people do when their hands are busy and their eyes do not have to meet. I learned about Tom that way. Tom was her husband, and he had died 2 years back in a hay baler accident, the kind of thing that happens in a single careless second to careful people. She had inherited the ranch and the debt, and the cattle and the empty side of the bed all at once, and she had simply kept the place running because the cattle did not care that she was grieving, and the bank did not either. She told me, one evening while we coiled wire, that the worst of it had not been the funeral but the first hard frost after, when a chore he had always done came around, and there was no one to do it but her. And she understood that grief was not a wave that came and went. It was just a new amount of work added to all the other work forever. She said it without self-pity. And I told her about my father, more than I had told anyone, the rig and the box of logbooks, and the 40 miles I was away when his heart stopped. I told her how he used to say there was no such thing as a dry country, only country where folks had quit before they got deep enough. She did not tell me it was not my fault. She just listened, and at the end she said, "Your father taught you to do the thing you did for me at 2 in the morning, and I think that is the part of him that didn't die." I had to walk out to the truck for a minute after she said that. When I came back, she had not moved, and she did not ask where I had gone, and she handed me the end of the wire again like nothing had happened, which was the kindest thing she could have done. The town was worried that whole summer, and the worry was always about water. Ardle is a small place, a feed store and a diner and a grain elevator, and that summer every conversation in the diner bent toward the wells. Old-timers who had drawn water off shallow wells their whole lives were watching them go thin. 3 other ranchers I knew had called me out for the same thing I had found at Della's, water that had walked down out of reach of wells that had been faithful for 50 years. And every one of those ranches sat in a ring around the same thing, which was the new place out on the flat that everyone called the Big Dairy. Sandhill Provision Dairy had come into the county a couple of years before, a corporate operation, thousands of head confined. With high-capacity wells they had drilled to feed the cattle and irrigate the feed they grew on the side. Those wells did not lift a trickle the way a windmill does. They pulled hundreds of gallons a minute, around the clock all summer. I am not a hydrologist, but I drill into that aquifer for a living, and you do not have to be a scientist to understand that if you stick enough big straws into a glass, the little straws at the edge start sucking air. I had a feeling that whole summer, the way you have a feeling about weather. I just did not have proof, and a feeling does not stand up anywhere it counts. There was a box in my truck the whole time. I want to come back to that because it sat behind the seat through all of this, the wooden box of my father's logbooks, and I had still never opened it. I knew roughly what was in it. My father was the kind of man who wrote everything down. For better than 30 years, every well he drilled or worked anywhere in this county, he had logged. The depth, the date, and the thing nobody else bothered to record, the static water level, how high the water stood in the ground that day at that spot. He measured it like other men checked the weather. I used to think it was just an old man's fussiness. I had carried that box around for 18 months and never lifted the lid, because opening it meant his handwriting, and his handwriting was a door I could not make myself walk through. But the dawning thing, the thing that crept up on me across those weeks, was that the answer to what was killing the wells of Ardle was sitting behind my truck seat. If anybody in the county had a record of where the water used to stand, decades of it, measured by hand at hundreds of points, it was my dead father. I knew it. I just could not yet make myself open the lid. The middle of that July is when the heat dome did its worst, and it is the night I do not like to talk about, but you should hear it, because it is the night everything turned. The temperature had not dropped below 90 at midnight in a week. The air was the color of a bruise. I was out at Della's late. We had been moving the herd toward the tanks fed by the new deep well. and a dry electrical storm came up over the dunes, all lightning and no rain, and the cattle, half crazy from heat and thirst and the noise of it, broke. 160 head broke the wrong way, away from the good water, toward the old creek bottom that everyone in that country knew had gone dry years back. They could smell the memory of water down there. There was none. I have never been so afraid in my working life. Della was up on her horse before I had the truck turned around, and we went after them in the dark across ground full of holes that could break a leg, the lightning showing us the herd in flashes like a thing seen through a broken film. If they reached the dry creek and packed into the cut bank, they would crush each other and bake there by sunup. We worked them from the flanks, the two of us, no words, just whatever a person can do with a horse and a truck and a voice gone raw, trying to bend a panicked herd back uphill toward the only water that could save them. We almost did not. There was a stretch, maybe 20 minutes, that felt like the whole night, where I thought we were going to lose all of it. The herd and the ranch and her, and whatever this was that I had not even named yet. And then the lead cows caught the smell of the deep tank on the wind, the good cold water, and they turned. And the rest followed the way water itself follows the low ground, all at once and without deciding, and they poured back to the tanks, and they drank and they lived. Everyone. We did not lose a single head. The sky lightened gray in the east, and Della got down off that lathered horse, and her legs would not hold her, and I caught her. And we stood there at the rail holding each other up because neither one of us could have stood alone, both of us shaking, both of us soaked through, and she looked up at me with the whole night still in her eyes, and she said it again. The thing she had said the first night, except it was not a question this time the way it had been then. She said, "Why would a stranger do this for me?" And then before I could answer, she said, "You're not a stranger anymore, and that is worse, because now I'm afraid you'll leave." I did the only thing the moment allowed, which was tell her the truth I had been carrying since the first night. I said I was not going anywhere, that I had spent 18 months running, and I had run all the way to her gate and stopped, and that somewhere in those weeks of fixing her floats and her fences, I had started to feel like a man again instead of a ghost in his father's shop. I did not say 100 prettier things I could have said. I am not a pretty words man. But she heard it, and she put her forehead against my chest, and we watched the sun come up on a herd that should have died and did not, and that was the first real morning of my life in a long time. I would like to tell you that was the end of the trouble. It was the start of the worst of it. Because the next week is when Curtis Lang came around in person. Lang was the land and water man for Sandhill Provision Dairy. His job, stripped of the smile, was to buy up the small ranches the dairy's own wells were drying out cheap, while the owners were too scared and too broke to argue. He drove a clean white truck that had never seen a sand trail until it saw ours, and he wore a pressed shirt, and he had a way of being sorry for you that made you want to count your fingers after you shook his hand. He had been after Della before I ever showed up, it turned out. Low offers, friendly visits, the patient pressure of a man who knows the bank statement better than you wish he did. Now that her well had failed and word had gotten around that she had spent money she did not have to deepen it, he came back smelling blood, and he put a number on the table that was an insult dressed as a mercy, and he put a deadline on it, signed by the date of the county hearing, or the offer goes away, and you can watch your water finish drying up on your own. I was there the afternoon he came with the papers. I stood off to the side while he made his pitch to Della on the porch, and I will give him this, he was good. He talked about how a young woman alone on a place this size was carrying an awful weight, how nobody would think less of her for taking a fair price. Every sentence was a kindness with a hook in it. When he drove off, Della stood at the rail a long time with the papers in her hand, and she said real quiet, "The terrible thing is that for about a minute there he almost had me, because I am tired, Wade, I am so tired, and a man who tells you you are allowed to quit is hard to hate." I told her she was not going to quit, and she was not going to be tired alone anymore. Lang worked the rest of the country the same way, and some of it took. An older man named Prout, who had run cattle on his ground for 50 years, sold out before the leaves turned, and he told me in the feed store lot that he was not selling because he believed the dairy. He was selling because he was old and scared, and it was the only one offering anything at all. The dairy had made sure he had no other choice, which is a particular kind of cruelty. Because that was the other thing that summer, the hearing. The County Natural Resources District, the NRD, the local board that actually holds the say over water in this state, had a public hearing set about 3 weeks out. Sandhill Provision had applied to expand their pumping permit, to put down more high-capacity wells and pull more water. If the board granted it, the small wells in that ring around the dairy were finished for good, Della's included. And the only way the board would deny it was if somebody could stand up at that hearing and prove that the dairy's existing wells had already caused the drawdown, that the water had not just wandered off in a dry year, but had been pulled down by the big straws. Lang knew that was the whole game. So Lang had come prepared. He had a report, a glossy thing, an engineering report with a consultant's name on it, and it said in expensive language that the falling water levels around Ardle were the result of natural drought conditions and long-term climate variability, and had nothing whatever to do with Sandhill Provision's wells. It was going to be the centerpiece of the dairy's case at the hearing. It was, I would come to understand, a lie with a footer on every page, and it was a good lie, the kind that is hard to argue with because it agrees with the sky. It had been a dry few years. Anybody could look up and nod. And then Lang made his mistake, the one that told me what kind of man he really was. There was an afternoon, about 10 days out from the hearing, when a section of the dairy's irrigation pipe that crossed near Della's east line let go. It flooded a low corner of her pasture and washed out a stretch of her fence, and her cattle drifted through the gap onto the road, and one of them got hit by a truck at dusk and had to be put down, and it cost her an animal she could not spare, and a vet bill she could not spare worse. Lang called it an accident, of course, and his company offered to pay for the fence generously as part of the buyout if she signed. He had the gall to use it. I stood in her kitchen the night that happened, and something in me that had been grieving for 18 months went very cold and very clear, and I thought about my father, and I thought about the box behind my seat, and I understood that I had run out of room to keep that lid closed. I want to be honest about how hard that was. I did not march right out and get it. I sat in the truck in the dark with my hand on the box wedged behind the seat, long enough that Della came to the kitchen window to see what had become of me. I had told myself for 18 months that I could not bear to see his handwriting. The truth was simpler. The book was not going to accuse me of his death. It was going to remind me of his life, of the man I had stopped trying to be while I hid in the back of his shop. But Della's fence was down, and Prout had signed, and a cow was dead in a ditch, and a man can only stay afraid of a dead man's handwriting for so long when the living need what is written in it. So I took a breath, and I carried the box inside. I set it on Della's kitchen table, and I opened it. His handwriting came up off those pages like his voice. I had braced for the grief, and the grief came, but underneath it, faster than I expected, came something else, which was pride, and then which was hope. Because there it all was. 30 years of my father's hand, well after well, the depth and the date and the static water level, hundreds of measurements, laid down by a careful man who had no idea he was building a case. Della sat down across from me, and we read his ledger together by the kitchen light half the night, and we found the wells nearest the dairy, the ones he had measured year after year going back decades, and we wrote the old numbers down. The water had stood high and steady in that ground my whole father's life. And then, starting almost exactly when Sandhill Provision's wells came online, in my father's own last entries, and in what I could measure now, it fell off a cliff. It did not drift. It dropped, and it dropped in a ring deepest nearest the dairy, exactly the way water bends toward a big pump, and not at all the way it behaves in a plain, dry year. My father had measured the truth for 30 years, without knowing what it was for. It was for this. The 3 weeks ran out the way they do, and the hearing was held in the county building in the next town over, a plain room with folding chairs and a long table where the NRD board sat, and it was full, every rancher in that ring of dying wells, and the diner crowd, and Lang in his pressed shirt with his glossy report and his consultant and a lawyer. They went first. The consultant put up his charts and said his careful words, natural drought, climate variability, no causal link, and Lang sat there nodding like a man at his own coronation. When they were done, you could feel the room sag, because it sounded official, and most of the people in that room had spent their whole lives being talked over by men who sounded official. Then it was the public's turn, and I want you to know that I am not a man who speaks in rooms. I had not slept. Della was beside me, and she put her hand over mine under the table, and I stood up, and I told the board who I was, Wade Holly's well driller, son of the well driller before me. And I said the falling water around Ardell was not a mystery and not the weather, and that I could prove it, because my father had been measuring the water in this county by hand for 30 years and writing it down, and I held up his ledger so they could see it was real, an old worn book full of a dead man's handwriting. I laid it out the way he would have wanted, plain and in order. I read them the static levels from his book, the steady high water of decades, well by well, the same wells the dairy's own consultant had charted. And then I read them the drop, and I showed them the timing, lined up to the month with the dairy's wells coming online, and the shape of it, the ring, deepest at the dairy and easing outward, which is the fingerprint of a big pump, and is nothing at all that a dry sky has ever done. The consultant's report had simply left my father's wells out. 30 years of the best long-term water data in the county, and it was not in their report, because it could not be in their report and have their report still say what they were paying it to say. When I pointed that out, when I asked the consultant straight whether he had reviewed the historical static level records for these exact wells, and he had to say no, the whole glossy thing came apart in the quiet of that room. You could hear it go. Lang stopped nodding. The board took it from there. They are local people, most of them ranchers themselves, and they know what a windmill knows. They denied the expansion outright, and they put hard limits on the pumping permit sandhill provision already had. Real limits with real metering, enough to let the shallow water heal. They entered my father's ledger into the record as evidence. And the falsified natural drought report, with its careful omission now hanging out in the open for everyone to see, went from being the dairy's strongest card to being the thing that sank them, because a board does not forgive being lied to. There was talk afterward of the state looking into the consultant. Lang was gone from the county before the leaves turned. I heard the dairy let him go. A man whose whole job was buying ruined ranches is not much use once the ranches stop getting ruined. The overlooked driller and the grieving widow walked out of that room into the afternoon sun, having beaten a thing nobody had thought could be beaten. And the strange part is that neither of us said much. We just stood by the truck a while. Some winds are too big for talking. The water under Della's grass was going to come back. Her ranch was going to be all right. And my father, who I had blamed myself for not saving, had reached out of his own grave and saved her, with my hands and his book, and the patient measurements of a careful man who wrote everything down. I had spent 18 months unable to open that box because I thought it held only my grief. It held my father, still working, still helping people get water out of the ground, which was the only kind of love he ever knew how to give. I stopped living out of my truck that full. I did not make a speech about it. One evening I just brought my things out to the ranch, the few things a man keeps, and Della cleared me a drawer like it was nothing and made it the most enormous thing anybody had ever done. And that was that. We did not have a wedding, not then, not the way stories want. We had something I trust more, which is a list of chores done together at dawn, day after day. Two people who had each learned the hard way how fast a life can be taken, choosing on purpose to build one slow. I kept drilling wells for the county. She kept her cattle and her books and her welding. We were not saved, either one of us. We were chosen by each other on purpose, which I have come to believe is the better thing. By the end of that next summer, the rains had come back some, and the limits on the dairy had let the shallow water rise, and Della's grass was green clear to the dunes, and the old windmill turned easy because there was water close again for it to lift. The deep well I drilled that first night still ran, but the country did not need it the way it had. And on the kitchen shelf, where Della had put it the morning after the hearing and where it has stayed, sits my father's ledger, closed now, its work done, An old book, a careful man filled with numbers that turned out to be the most important thing anybody in that county ever wrote down. I have thought a great deal about water since that summer. It is patient. It does not announce itself. It sits in the dark under the grass where no one looks, and it will rise for you if you give it the chance, and it will leave if you take too much, and either way it does not hurry and it does not explain. People are not so different. The ones who matter are not the ones who show up in daylight with a handshake and a fair price. They are the ones who answer the phone at 2 in the morning when the herd is dying, who hold the light, who read the gauges back, who stay through the long dark part where nobody is sure it will work. My father showed up for 30 years with a notebook and never knew it would save a woman's whole life and bring his son back from the dead in the only way that mattered. Della showed up at her own gate with a lantern and would not quit. And I, who had thought my only worth was the work, learned that the work was just the way I knew how to say I am here. I will stay. You can stop being afraid now. The water came back. The grass came back. I came back. And the people who show up in the dark, I have learned, are the ones who stay.